I'm Melissa, and I was fortunate enough to get to work and help develop the Science and Society course thread. And today I'm going to be talking about the overview of the classes that I've taken within the course thread. And I'm going to focus on a specific theme that that was talked about in all the different classes that I took. Because Science and Society is kind of a big category, and I don't think I'd be able to do justice to it all in one day. So in figuring out how to tackle what Science and Society means and how that's implied and understood within our society, I decided to take the route that most anthropology majors take. So looking at science and society as two separate epistemological descriptions of the way in which we kind of view and understand our world. And like Effie was saying earlier, there tends to be this binary between science and society, much like nature and culture. And our world is kind of filled with binaries and dichotomies. And though the two tend to be presented as such, the classes in this course thread, as I think everybody's experience here at Berkeley, tends to advocate that the two are just intricately, intertwined together. And that's kind of what this course thread showcased for me. So when I look at the two, most people tend to put them on a spectrum and don't tend to see them as kind of one unifying way in which to look at the world. And science tends to become associated with the biological, the hard sciences, the life sciences, and it's a discipline and a dogma that tends to be based upon rationality and empiricism and this kind of one-dimensional sense of what objectivity means as a foundation for how to kind of understand how we interact with things in the world. And the setting kind of takes place in laboratories, and that's where the scientists in their lab coats create new chemicals, create vaccines, or there's the computer programmers that are creating the mobile apps. And nevertheless, these are the arenas in which kind of scientific truths and facts are produced, and all these things and all these technological innovations tend to, nevertheless inspire us and produce this sense of safety within the world with these kind of cold, hard scientific facts that allow us to function. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we tend to have society, which tends to enter more into a cultural realm based around social thought and our own historical moments, and is kind of based around a sense of relativity as opposed to a universalism. So by taking these classes, which are as follows, I learned how science and society work towards one another and kind of build off one another. And just through these 4 classes, you definitely learn that progress and modernity and development, which tend to be a theme throughout all 4 of these, can't just be looked at from one place. They're always intertwined with power relationships and issues of race and class and gender and age. And you can't discuss disease just from the biological spectrum where you're just looking at the symptoms and the science behind disease. You have to understand how the body is culturally constructed, and you can't look at the ways in which disease outbreaks affect populations without, regarding how those are socially constructed as well and brought up. So as you can tell, there's kind of this general theme throughout these classes. It's health and medicine and technology, and so I decided to talk about that, but then also talk about the element of risk, which is kind of always present within science and society, and sometimes it can be really apparent, and sometimes it can be a little bit more implicit. So the first class I'm going to talk about is this archaeology class that I took that was cross-listed with letters and science. And I took it last spring with Professor Sabrina Agarwal and Professor Lori Wilkie, who are both from the Anthropology department. And on the forefront, archaeology is the study of human material and objects used in the past by peoples over space and time. And bioarchaeology, which was the special topic of this class, draws upon archaeology, but also considers the skeletal remains within the archaeological context. And bioarchaeology, just the definition of it, is very science and society-like from the outfront, because you draw in the sciences, you draw in the skeletal remains and the forensics, and then you also draw in the cultural component to that, which is archaeology, and kind of situating the body within a certain context that differs from, across time and across space. And one of the first things we went through on the first day of class was, what do skeletons tell us? Because Bones and shows like that have kind of promoted this one way of like how we think forensic anthropologists work and how we think bioarchaeologists work, and it's incredibly different. But skeletons have the ability to tell us what foods we've eaten, diseases we've had, and kind of our general lifestyle. And okay. So yeah, just a general overview right here. And this is kind of what was presented to us as the first day is, if you guys learn to understand bioarchaeology and you guys look at skeletons, these are certain things that you can get just from looking at a skeleton, analyzing certain bones. And this was something that was brought up to us in the very first lecture. So here you see on the left-hand side, you see what's a case of rickets, which is basically a vitamin D deficiency that affects the way that the bones are formed. There's less calcium and they end up having this bow-legged effect. And then on the right-hand side, there's Harris lines, which you can see in the long bones right there, which are also called growth arrest lines. And they tend to show signs of malnutrition or trauma or disease amongst juveniles. And I think the way that risk can be viewed in the bioarchaeological context is when you're looking at skeletons and you're looking at cases like this, you are able to assess the risks that these skeletons, these people endured throughout their life. So, you can see in the bones that, they somehow, maybe this is what led to their eventual deaths, or maybe it didn't. Maybe this is something they lived with for a while because, you can see the long bones are larger and people actually grew up and survived through nutrition. So you can kind of get a sense as to the environmental setting and some of the things that they were able to overcome. And one of the other ways to look at risk within bioarchaeology, besides the fact that it's kind of the study of how people ended up surviving or succumbing to risk, is that when looking at bones tend to have this allure of having this cold, hard, authoritative nature where you can look at bones and all these questions are answered. But, that's not the case. And the great thing about bioarchaeology in this class was that it showed that bones definitely provide at least one portion of the story and provide evidence right in front of you of what the body experienced, but at the same time you have to understand the greater picture that archaeology tends to provide. And only by understanding all the components, the archaeological ones and the biological skeletal ones, can you kind of truly assess the lifestyle that the individual lived and then get a better understanding as to the bigger picture of the culture that this person lived in and lived through. So the next class that I took in the course ed was Native American Studies 178, which was titled Disease, Demography, and Politics. And it was kind of a rough class to take because I think everybody's kind of aware to an extent that the Native history that they're exposed to growing up is not an accurate rendition of what exactly happened. But it's one thing to know that, and then it's one thing to be this was one of the first classes I took here at Cal, and it's one thing to sit through an entire semester where you are reading through the Indian Census Bureaus and you're reading through the government documents, which really put personal accounts as well as the actual numbers recorded of the amount of deaths that were experienced specifically with this class between the interactions with all the American Indians and the Europeans with all the different pathologies that they had brought over from the, into the New World. And so one of the two things that was used in this class was manifest destiny, which is this picture that we see right here that, maybe we've seen before, but it's this idea that all Americans, and by all Americans, the manifest destiny, the people advocating it were the colonists, advocated this idea that the colonists had this divine and explicit and kind of right and destiny to colonize all America. And they used the Imperial medicine model to do just that. And the Imperial medicine model was definitely the beginning to what we see right now is kind of this dominant Western view of science, which in medical anthropology we discuss a lot as the biomedical framework. And this class basically focused on the effects of just this one type of model of basically medicine and practice, and just how this, along with manifest destiny, was able to actually push forward most of the colonization that happened within the United States. So the model is defined as the practice of Western scientific medicine in the conquest, colonization, or control of native nations. And this was the predominant way that medicine was viewed until the public health service model in the early 1900s. So this class discussed, or kept on drawing back upon the way that the craniologists and phrenologists used science to basically as a mode of justification for colonization. And before the scientific experts began their studies, U.S. officials and colonists had already alienated American Indians by depicting them as kind of evil and savage and threatening, and basically created them or made them up to be these domestic threats, when in reality the colonists were the ones that were coming in here and creating havoc. It wasn't the Native Americans that had been living here for all these years beforehand. But it was pretty amazing the way that the media surrounding Native Americans made them seem like they were threats. And this stereotype continued on largely because of science and the work done by phrenologists like Charles Caldwell right here on the left. And he was one of the ones that kind of led the study with the distinct races of man. And this poster on the right is actually entitled "The Breeds of the World" or something to that effect, which, places the Caucasian man on top as the most superior, and the African American and the Indian on the bottom as being the least superior. And through this, settlers blamed Indians for the diseases that they contracted because Native Americans were somehow defective and thus deserved to suffer from the maladies that the colonists had introduced. And the bottom line was that these narratives that Indians somehow provoked and deserved the deliberate transmission of germs made people made the public at the whole see that scientists and respected officials who were academics were saying that, the different sizes in cranium, in cranial capacities directly attributed to basically their self-worth and their intellect, and therefore, if they were lesser beings, that somehow the white colonists taking over their land and expanding wasn't really going to do much for the Native Americans, and it wasn't really a concern because they were somehow subhuman or lesser or somehow inherently defective. And so we can see here how science and, or science rather, and the idea of phrenology was just one way that political agendas could be pushed forward and actually allow for something as devastating as, land rights being taken away from Native peoples just through the kind of like allure of science and this idea that certain people can somehow be inherently defective based on their race. And so just for time's sake, I decided to combine the last two anthropology classes I took because they both have to do largely with medical anthropology. So Anthropology 115 was a special topics medical anthropology class I took over the summer with James Battle. And the special topics for that was colonialism and development. And the class I'm in right now that I'm finishing up is with Professor Corey Hayden. And the topic for that class is science, technology, and medicine. And so I decided to look at this one case study, which some people may have heard about, some might not. And it's with the Havasupai, who are a Native American group that actually live at the basin of the Grand Canyon, and they've lived there for hundreds and thousands of years. And a few years back, Arizona State University officials came and offered to take blood samples and run genetic tests on the Havasupai community because there was this astronomically high rate of diabetes that nobody was really understanding. And so the Havasupai tribe consented and said, yes, we'd be willing to give you our blood samples in hopes that you can help us find a cure for diabetes. And years later, it was realized that those tests hadn't been run, and instead the researchers from Arizona State University had run tests on using the blood to see if there was any links between schizophrenia and other mental disorders and alcoholism, and things that basically the tribe had not consented for. And anybody who's taken Native American studies knows, or just kind of seen some of these dated movies, that there's always been this kind of rhetoric and discourse behind Native American studies that Native Americans have kind of battled upwards against, where the stereotype of the kind of raging alcoholic Native American that's savage, or the, as we saw with the phrenologist, somehow lesser and subhuman and prone to having mental disorders like schizophrenia. And so it just shows how even in the 21st century, studies like this that utilize science and genes and medicine can be used to kind of perpetuate some of these old stereotypes that people have had to endure. And, luckily there was a lawsuit and things were rectified, but still, race and colonialism and medicine and power dynamics can all definitely work together. And science and society is kind of going to always be in this this one way of kind of, in this unified way of looking at the world where one can't really escape the other, because you can't just ever run a scientific test or just place somebody into a specific group without considering, kind of the larger social and cultural implications, which is what this class talked about, because the discussion of using science to place certain peoples, whether that be based on age or gender or race, into certain risk groups kind of ends up, oftentimes perpetuating stereotypes or having these kind of social and cultural effects. So I'm going to end on that note.